Hello everyone, and welcome to the JMC Cast. I am Joseph, and today I'm joined by...
Oh, Seren, hi!
Yeah, and it's Michael again.
Anyway, today we are going to be talking about two more foreign films, but first of all, let's talk about our weeks. So, Michael, how's your week been?
I spent my last week pondering why you named this the JMC Cast, which literally means Joseph and Michael Cast.
Yeah. Well, I managed to, lampshade that with our email address quite well, so... I've acknowledged that it's stupid, so that's all that really matters. Anyone can see. All that really matters to me. And how's your week been, Seren?
Yeah, it's been nice. Kind of doing nothing at all apart from watching D&D videos, and that's about it. Quite fun.
Nice. I've played through BioShock, well, most of it, which... I don't know, I've played through BioShock Infinite before, and I think I prefer Infinite to the original, which I know is quite an unpopular opinion, but I don't know, I just prefer the skyness to the seaness, because I think the sky is just beautiful. I'm a sucker for clouds, like if there's a cloud I'll always be looking at it, it's very nice. Okay, so without further ado, let's get onto it. So I've got a little penny here, and if it lands on heads, then we'll do Woman on Fire first. If it lands on tails, we'll do Dance of Reality first. So let's see.
Ah, yes, my favourite movie, Woman on Fire.
Heads, and that is... Was that Portrait of a Lady on Fire?
Yeah.
Female conflagration painting? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, Seren, it was your movie, so do you want to start off?
Oh, so much pressure. Okay, where... I don't know. You guys can begin. I don't know where to start.
So, Michael, what did you think of the movie?
I think I'm qualified to talk about it because I finished it about half an hour ago. Yeah, I was behind schedule, so I had to fit it in somewhere, and it turned out to be right before this. Not that that's a problem though, because I enjoyed watching it, so that probably helps.
It was good. It won 11 awards or something, which was quite impressive.
I know it got something it can. I'll double check what it actually won. Probably deserved them, to be fair, no question on that.
It was absolutely beautiful. I mean, the one thing that I picked up quite early, the framing device. I quite liked that, the way that they framed the whole thing, no pun intended. With
yeah, I agree with you on that.
The school. And
yeah,
that was just fantastic.
It's all in retrospective.
And I liked the whole opening scene with her, and it shows you that because the way she looks at the painting, you understand that however this movie ends, it's not going to end with them together. So you know, it's kind of like Romeo and Juliet, where it tells you from the get-go that the two aren't going to end up together, if you get me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Otherwise, not especially similar, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's doomed from the start, basically.
Yes.
And the audience knows that it's never gonna work out, which I think is also kind of becomes apparent as it goes on, because it seems to take place in probably the space of about a couple of weeks at most, so it's a very limited time frame.
Yes.
For all the events to transpire.
Yes, and it's 18th century France, which unfortunately is not the best place to be a lesbian in. Well, there are worse places.
I mean, yeah, but it's still not exactly ideal. I mean, late 18th century France isn't ideal for many reasons.
Yeah, I mean, as nobles, I think they should probably be watching their necks, so to speak. I was quite interested with the direction. I thought it was absolutely gorgeous. Oh
yeah, definitely.
I noticed
really well directed.
In the first few scenes, especially when she's out, the painter woman's outside the castle-y thingy Madudar. There's a lot of
house. It's a mansion, small manor house, I think.
Yes. I believe it is.
He agrees, and I think that I think what makes a movie so beautiful is that it's not only about art, and art is throughout the whole movie, but each scene could be paused, and it looks almost like a painting or photograph. It's that beautiful.
It's the someone calls it the screensaver movie, wherein every frame could be a screensaver for your computer, it is a good sign. Yeah, it feels very purposefully constructed. At no point... It's on the longer end, it's about 2 hours, but there never felt like there was anything that was unnecessary. Every shot
Agreed.
and frame had a purpose and it had its place. It obviously was taken. It's a real feat of editing to get it so tightly constructed.
Yeah, agreed. And I think
It's also down to the actors as
yeah,
well,
obviously.
showing that like no bit of script or performance was wasted. They chewed that script to the finest degree, and they
Very small cast of very talented actors.
produced something beautiful.
I think
And
the hue as well that they used.
yeah, it was an interesting choice, and I'm quite in favour of it.
I think as well with the hue and the lighting and the colour scheme that they use throughout the movie, it has this very kind of almost like Renaissance or classical art feel to it. It feels very natural and organic, like a relationship does. You know, a lot of romantic movies kind of fall into this, not necessarily trap, but this thing where everything is over-exaggerated, you know. There's a big, massive scene where they show their love and it's all like so like exaggerated, it's not realistic. And with this, everything in it was so human, you know. There was no massive gesture of love. It was just two people stumbling along, trying to figure out their own feelings towards each other. And it was just so poetically and beautifully, like, shown.
It never feels dramatic. It's realistically subtle in the sense that you just... It doesn't feel the need to tell you what's going on. It just lets the performances show for themselves and you can interpret the characters' feelings in your own way. You know, it never felt overly explanatory. Again, the dialogue, like we were saying about the shots and the framing, it's all very tightly written and never overly expository, or it never feels like too much.
Agreed, yeah. I think the dialogue in it was quite sparse, and that kind of made every word have a ton of more meaning to it.
Yeah, it won Best Screenplay for at Cannes, so I think you can see why.
As Seren was saying with lighting earlier, I really liked the lighting. For example, a lot of the scenes where it was like at night, it was all a beautiful orange. And then the scenes during day, even within the house, there's just light flooding in and making everything feel sort of dreamlike. It confused me early on. I was like, why is there light over there? But obviously there's massive fuck-off windows because it's...
Very sunny and very natural
manner.
and very airy, which obviously makes sense for the location.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I think as well, like, the way it uses the elements in it is really interesting. Like, at the beginning of the movie, when she's not only in the boat next to water, where she gets thrown into it, or later on where she's not only sitting next to the fire, but she's smoking a pipe. And I think there's almost something poetic in it, especially when you look at almost like the spiritual symbolism that a lot of cultures have to the elements, how water is about emotions and how almost she gets on her journey there, it's like the whole trip she's going to be physically thrown into emotions, to a territory which is so vast, you know, that she could drown in it really. But and then with the fire's all about passion, and how she burns the painting, it's all so poetic. And it's really interesting how you can just like rip these scenes apart and just interpret how maybe each element which is involved, how the director, maybe she intended it to be interpreted. I don't know, what do you guys think about the elements in it?
I mean, I think you could probably spend hours just deconstructing the symbolism.
Yeah.
The fire, the water. From the one that the image that struck me the most was the faceless portrait burning in a fireplace. Couldn't tell you what it means, but I can certainly tell you it's memorable. I also found it interesting thinking about the paintings was that in the opening scene in the when she's teaching the students and they sort of turn their attention to the painting, I originally thought we were actually going to see it be painted, but it's not. It's never shown again, I think, after that one opening, which is... I don't know if that means anything, but I found that sort of quite interesting because I'd been expecting it to happen. My expectations were subverted, apparently.
I get what you mean. I think it could be almost like after she's holding on to her so much that even once she's gone, she keeps on just painting her over and over again so that she doesn't lose her. And so that as her memory fades, she still has a picture of her to keep with her always.
Yeah, there was that scene later on where they're both in bed, and she does say that she's like, and she gives the other woman the painting in the book on page 28 to remember her by, which I thought was adorable.
Yeah.
That was cute.
There's the thing she said about...
I mean, there are a lot of really adorable moments in this film.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons it works is that they're a completely believable couple.
Yeah.
Nothing feels forced whatsoever with their relationship. You can just see them together and it makes sense.
And I like as well with page 28 how it wasn't just a throwaway thing, how it was like page 28 done. It was kind of like later on when she looks at the painting of her with her child, she sees her opening the book to page 28, and it was cute because it's like she never forgot her. You know, that love that they still have for each other is there.
And of course, and it's sad at the end when they're both in the sort of opera house, and she looks across and thinks that she hasn't noticed her. But of course, and that ending shot is with the music and the slow zoom is absolutely riveting. But the realization that, because obviously it's the music that she played for her earlier, and the realization that she's crying and she has remembered her, but you know
she just can't
she
see
hasn't
her.
realized that. It's quite sad, actually. I mean, it's all quite, the ending in general is quite sad, but that especially really. Oof.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, really, any story with like any sort of unrequited love is heartbreaking
Or
when it ends.
impossible love, I think.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
It was never going to happen for a long time. It just, the world wouldn't allow it, and it's tragic.
But they were allowed a brief moment of love, and it, as even though it flickered out, the flame was brighter than all the love around them. If you get me, didn't burn for a long time, but it burned for a good time.
Oh, what was it? The flame that burns twice as bright burns half as long.
Oh yeah.
They had a chance.
Exactly.
Even if it was a very small chance, they still had something there at least.
Which I suppose is more than a lot of people have.
Definitely. Yeah.
I like the.
I think
one of the things I liked as well was you don't need to the sense that the family, the aristocratic family themselves, clearly seem to have fallen on hard times. It's never actually mentioned, but the fact that if the house itself is clearly quite old, most of the paintwork is scratching away. The reception room hasn't been used in years. They only seem to have one maid servant, and it's just the two of them living there. So you do get the impression that they've seen better days and are now sort of in decline.
Yeah, and I think as well with the kind of the mention of the suicide of her sister at the beginning of the movie, maybe the house in a way, or like could be a personification of maybe the mind of the mother or the maiden of the house, because she's in disrepair and the house is in disrepair, and it's all connected to the daughter who killed herself, well, was hinted to kill herself at the house possibly, or maybe that's a bit too outlandish.
The way I interpreted the death of the sister was the constraints of society at the time, and the fact that if the one that was still alive wasn't able to kind of live for a bit and experience what she needed to experience, she would have ended up just like her sister. And so it's really
she could have gone down
fortunate
the same path.
yeah, it's fortunate
I
that
think
our
in many
painter
ways
girl
the
came
sister
along.
does, despite the fact we never see her and she's only ever mentioned, she does cast, that character does cast a shadow over the rest of the movie in many ways, as like other thing, like you said, is a sort of a potential path for her living sibling.
Yes, I quite liked the bit with the Greek mythology and the symbolism of that. I thought that was really beautiful.
Orpheus and Eurydice, I can never pronounce it right. I remember, as interesting as well, because I watched the scene. I was like, on that scene, I was thinking, okay, yeah, I get it. Orpheus and Eurydice, underworld, turn back, see the love. I get the symbolism. Isn't this a bit on the nose? But then by the end of the movie, it actually did feel appropriate to have that and just that little extra explanation of the story.
Because she couldn't look back and see her love.
Yeah, although she did look back, didn't she? Right at the end. She looked back and then went, which of course is what Orpheus did. But again, and the way she interprets the story herself seems to imply that it was a deliberate decision rather than an irrational impulse.
So, yeah.
How you do.
I also quite liked how there was pretty much no soundtrack or anything. Most of the music either came from ambient sounds, like the beautiful waves crashing upon the sea, or people singing, or pianos, and I think that just led an extra level of reality to it. It didn't feel like it had been pushed through a bunch of orchestras and stuff.
Any non-diegetic sound, because when there is music like the scene around the bonfire and the final shot in the opera house, it seems to be music that the characters are hearing as well. So I don't... and of course, using it incredibly sparingly makes it way more impactful, but certainly the lack of it gave a far stronger sense of realism to it all.
Definitely.
Do you know what they were singing around the bonfire? Because to me it sounded like they were saying poisson orumjek, poisson being French for fish and orumjek being Turkish for spider. So to me,
they almost certainly won't. It was probably French or sound like French. Maybe, probably wouldn't have been Latin, which is the usual sort of mysterious music language, but it would have been something in French. Might be significant in French. I mean, it's amusing to you because you know a random word in another language that kind of sounded like it.
Made it sound like spiderfish.
I wonder if the lyrics are actually significant in some way. Probably are.
Well, I tried to look up afterwards if there was any like folk tales or myths or stories about a spider and a fish, but there aren't because that's silly.
Oh, I wish there were. That would have been a really cool combination.
Yeah.
That you think you're safe once you're out of the water, but no, he's got 8 legs. His fish is just running after you.
Oh god, that sounds like some people's worst nightmare.
Literally. About like, there's a recurring scene, like theme in the movie with these. She sees the ghost of the girl in a wedding dress, and I'm really interested to see how you guys interpreted that, because I've got a couple of ideas about it, and there's like,
I kind of saw it as her not wanting time to pass in a way, because she knows that in a few days, in a few weeks, the one she loves is going to get married, and even though she's having a great time, she can't stop herself from seeing the one she loves about to be wedded to someone else. And the shot we see of her in the wedding dress later on is the same shot they push back through the movie. Yeah. And it's not some sort of Donnie Darko thing, it's, you know, her...
Yeah, it's the shot appears, I think it appears twice, and then the third time it's her actually there. And obviously, watching, you're like, that's where it's come from. But whether
I did nearly get jump scared by it on the first time.
Yeah, it's not clear what exactly it actually is. If it's just imagination or a vision of some kind, or possibly it's a device for the audience. You're not literally seeing her, but she's thinking about her leaving and getting married. I think, honestly, it's open to interpretation. You could look at it whichever way you want.
It could be like a metaphor to how their love, even though they are stuck in the time they are, the love sort of transcends the time periods where it's not seen as the norm back then, but kind of showing that the time for the wedding dress isn't sort of lining up. You understand what I'm saying?
I think so. If you
I
don't
don't.
mind, like, yeah.
Oh, what were you going to say, Seren? I thought you were going to say something about your interpretation.
I had a couple of different interpretations. So the first one was that maybe kind of when you, for me at least, it's almost like if I've had a real big crush on someone or a real big attraction to them, it's like they've been a spectre in my mind, like they're a ghost. And no matter what I do, they're always kind of looming over my shoulder. Wherever I think about, they seem to pop up and are always there, even when they're miles away. So I'm kind of haunted by them. I was wondering if maybe it was the same for her, or maybe because she was in the wedding dress, she's haunted by the idea that she is going to leave her. And that is, although this is a beautiful romantic experience, the looming thought that this is going to end at the end of the next few days is stuck with her, and she can't seem to shake it off. Once again, she's haunted by this idea. Because I don't know, that's how I interpret ghosts. But then when you about the mythology connection, maybe it could have something to do with the I can't say the name either, but how they, you know, with the mythological story which they brought up in it, maybe the ghost, like in that, like she's a ghost, and I don't know. But yeah, mainly the first two.
I feel like it could almost be both of them.
Yeah.
Like at the same time, she's haunted by her because she's constantly thinking of her, but she's also the wedding dress because she's constantly thinking of the fact that it's all temporary and it's going to end soon, really. But
I think there are a lot of ways to interpret this whole film. Well, a lot of areas in this film. And that's what's beautiful about films. You can analyse them and come up with your own meaning to them.
This one especially, like I said, it doesn't feel the need to explain itself too much, and it lets you think about it for yourself and come up with your own understanding and interpretations of it.
Yeah, because like everyone's experience with romance and love is different, and this kind of, it definitely puts it in a natural light, but also, you know, its ability to be open-ended and not just this is how they feel and this is how you should feel, kind of allows the audience to put themselves in their shoes, to kind of relate to it. And almost, although of course, you know, we've never had the experience of being a lesbian or at least bisexual back in the 1700s, 1800s, we can at least feel it from a modern perspective with our own interpretations of being what it is like to maybe like someone these days, or at least have a crush. I don't know your guys' experience are, but yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I see. It is relatable in that sense of the subtlety of it. Gotta give credit to all of the cast, honestly, because they were all so good. Absolutely blew it out of the park. Pretty much every performance, you know, all like 4 of them.
Definitely.
Really, really impressive.
See, I thought after watching this, I thought you'd really like this, because you said that your favourite films have scenes of just 2 characters sitting down and talking, and most of this film is just 2 people in a room together talking about stuff or making eye movements. It doesn't feel a need to use a big cast, because the cast it does use fits so well together that they don't need to kind of dilute it with other actors.
I wonder what the budget was. Out of curiosity.
Because they didn't have like big costume changes either. They had like, they stuck pretty much in the same costume shot.
There's only a €5 million budget, so very, very low budget.
Yeah, it's quite good.
Which is obviously, it's really impressive they're able to make such a good-looking movie on that low budget. But you know, it is very small cast, barely any costume changes, restricted to a small, basically a single location really, the house and a few other scenes and the beach and outside it. Certainly a good example of how to do well with a small budget.
Definitely. I think
almost certainly.
The characters in it are really interesting, because I don't know their names, but the girl with the blonde hair especially, she's got this kind of very childish character, and kind of, I don't know, when the way she acts, especially at the beginning, it's quite immature. She wants attention, she wants everything else, and she kind of, pouts a bit and gets in a bit of a strop.
A bit petulant, yeah.
Yeah, but there's a complete juxtaposition between her and the artist. Kind of, she's more mature, she's doing her job, and it's just it's interesting how they're so opposite and yet they balance each other out in such a beautiful way. And it's just so cute as well how throughout the whole movie, they, even though it's just a couple of days, they learn so much about each other. Like, they're there like, oh, like, you breathe through your nose when you're stressed and all of that. And it's like how kind of aware they are of their surroundings and how much they think about each other.
I think that was definitely one of my favourite scenes with where
you could tell
she's in the
how
green
much
dress
they
and
had
painted.
actually been looking at and thinking about each other, at the point they're picking up these tiny little details and subtleties of how they express their emotions. That sort of genuine understanding of the other person, which has arisen in such a short span of time.
They certainly know what's up.
Yeah. And fire seems like the most, what you're saying about the elements, fire does seem like the most appropriate sort of symbolism, in that it's bright and passionate and short.
Yeah.
Last.
I think another one that I thought was really good was the scene at the piano, because if you look at the blonde woman, who kind of looks like someone in my form, which I thought was weird, she spends the whole time at the piano looking at the painter woman, like just analysing her, seeing how she plays.
I remember noticing that she doesn't look off her at any point, I think, during the whole movie.
No, you can feel the attraction and the general tension between the two in that scene. I think it's magnificently performed. And going back to what Seren said earlier with the elements, there's the whole thing of, it's about a storm, that piano piece, so that's kind of like the wind in a way.
Yeah.
Emotional turmoil, I think, and all those stuff you associate with it.
Air, interestingly, like, I love all this spiritual stuff because I'm such like a spiritual junkie, but like air is kind of connected to the mind, and apparently like it's like people connect it to kind of thoughts and creativity, so that's really interesting when it comes to like air element tends to be connected to like sticking in your head kind of thing. So if it's connected to a storm is quite violent, but it's also connected to air element, which is very much imaginative and in your mind. Then maybe the whole interpretation from that could be a kind of like, there's this internal storm inside her, this balance between like, I'm getting this strong attraction to her, but I'm going to be married in a few days and I'm supposed to like men, but why do I love her so much? And that kind of, that battle kind of inside her head as she looks at her, maybe, but
the internal conflict she's going through.
And again, that fits into the ending with the emotional storm that she has at the end when she's remembering her. It's just...
She really seems overwhelmed, doesn't
beautiful.
she? Smiling and crying and really... She
doesn't know how to feel.
That's for sure. I got it. The more I think about the ending, the sadder I feel. In the sense that both of them are... Obviously, they'll never be together, which is sad in itself. You know, the blonde-haired aristocrat is going to spend the rest of her life married in Milan. You know, she has a child who resembles her quite noticeably. You know, it's comfortable, but it's not what she wanted. And our main protagonist, the implication is she'll never be able to properly pursue painting because she's not a man. And what she can do is restricted by the culture of the time. I think she has to use her father's name. Yeah, she presents paintings under her father's name. Mm-hmm. It's restricted from painting male nudes and all that sort of stuff, the arbitrary restrictions that are put on her purely because she's a woman.
Very unfair.
I'm just kind of depressed now because I feel really bad for both of them.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those movies that the more you think about it, the more sorrowful it is, because especially like the discussion of the sexism of art at the time, it's really interesting kind of as well. Like art at the time had this, well, throughout history really, had this sexualization of a female figure, but the male figure would not be allowed to be painted unless it was like Cupid or a couple of other people. That was seen as pornography, but the female figure was constantly naked because that was just seen as art, you know, the objectification. So it's interesting kind of, I don't know, in a way how the movie takes that objectification and rips it apart. Like the scene where they're both naked and she's painting herself. She's not sexualizing herself, she's just showing herself in her natural form to give to her, like the gift of her, in a way that, you know, she's gave her physical and now she's giving her the idea of her.
Yes, it's like that thing where people would make sculptures of women and call it art, but if there was a sculpture of a woman with a mirror, they'd quite often label it as vanity, where it's, on one hand, it's everyone else viewing the woman's body, but if a woman likes her own body, then that is seen as vain.
Looking into the mirror is an old... Yeah, I mean, that's Narcissus, again, from the Greek mythology. He was so
with
absorbed...
the pond.
He was absorbed by his own reflection. Looking into a mirror is a very traditional symbol of vanity. But in this case, I think it's actually inverted, because while she is looking into a mirror to draw herself, it's not for her, it's for somebody else.
It's for her lover.
It's the opposite of vanity. It's an act of kind of selflessness that isn't really focused on her, because she's creating a gift for somebody. I did like with that as well, how they kind of talk about that idea that, I can't remember the exact line, talking about how the more she looks at the painting of the person, eventually it'll be that becomes the image of them rather than the person themselves.
Yeah.
And the sense that no matter how good the artist is, at the end of the day, the portrait is never going to completely replicate the actual person.
It reminds me of something I heard a while ago, how if a piece of art is perfect, then it's not the best, because for art to be art, it has to have little imperfections that leave part of the artist in it, because without part of the artist, it loses all meaning. Exactly. There've got to be bits that show it was made by you, but dot for dot, well, you might as well just be printing off a photograph. There's got to be little things that give it personality. And I think that
the little piece of the artist that's always in their art.
Yeah.
It's sort of true with everything as well as painting.
Yeah, and it goes back to that scene where she did the first painting of her and then scribbled over it, and she said, well, why can't you paint me like this? And she said, well, because there are rules on how we have to paint, and there are methods. But only when she throws the methods and the general ideas of how you're supposed to paint someone out of the window does she get a painting that truly looks like her and has her sort of soul in it.
Actually, now I think about it though, because the final painting isn't immediately visibly different from the first one. But it's clearly a superior portrait because of all of the subtle details and elements and tweaks that could only have come from the deeper emotional understanding of the subject that the artist has gained.
And then at the end,
we can only speculate what happened to the original guy who was brought in to paint her and never succeeded. But obviously, considering he never did the face, it must have gone well for him. Possibly because he couldn't understand the subject for whatever reason, and hence he failed to create the portrait.
Or even that, you know, she kind of banned him from looking at her or showing herself in a true form, kind of like she did at the beginning, hidden.
Yeah, choosing to be vulnerable or to expose herself as she is to somebody.
Yeah.
Because when was it in the movie that she first allowed the painter woman to see her without the bandana? Because I don't know when
it's
it
when
was.
it's when they go out together on the first walk and she runs ahead to the cliff and then turns around and looks directly into the camera. That's the first time the audience or the characters see her. That's a good ways into the movie as well. So there is a bit of suspense built about.
There's a lot of mystery about her.
She's constantly referred to, but you don't see her until a fair ways in.
Yes.
And it's a great scene because it doesn't just like introduce her like, hi, this is me, this is my name. It like throws you into her character. It shows you her most kind of organic and raw, where she's running and she's like the other woman's like, do you want to die? And she's like, no, run, like you know. And it's a beautiful scene.
Yeah, I think it's a really good example of how to do a good character introduction, because obviously so much of the audience's impressions and understanding of a character come from that first impression, and often to make them memorable you need to give them a good entrance, because otherwise it'll fall flat.
Definitely.
It's like she's properly enraptured in the freedom, because when she's around men she has to conduct herself in a certain way that society would allow. But while she's with her painter friend, because she's a woman, she doesn't have to follow that kind of strict guideline. And I mean, it kind of reminds me, because whilst there weren't any like people going around saying they are lesbians around that time, it was, I mean, I think a bit earlier, it was quite often that a woman would have a female travelling companion, because going on long trips with a man, well, they're a man, who knows what they can do. And it's not safe to go on your own, so they would typically have a female companion, which, I mean, female companion, you can probably guess what was going on.
It might have, it might not have. That's the thing, it would depend between different people and their different interpersonal relationships. But certainly in this case, the desire to run simply because she can, because it's not conforming to a social etiquette, it's a little bit of freedom, even it's only very small.
I think as well it's interesting to connect kind of the movie, like what Joseph was saying, with history, because you know, oftentimes with history, these sort of stories that are so big and impactful on people's life about their love and their identity, they're forgotten. We never learn them, you know. And oftentimes, you know, historians looking at these people hundreds of years later would be like, oh yeah, she was a straight woman, and that was it. That's all we'd know. We'd never learn this about her. And I think
it's especially funny when you have like the 19th century, especially earlier 19th and early 20th century historians who will see cases of historical figures who were like clearly gay and just somehow managed not to notice that.
Yeah.
And, I think the problem is, of course, it's so poorly recorded because of social stigmas. Usually, you know, the only people that we can be sure of when it comes to this kind of thing were figures like King Frederick the Great of Prussia, where he was powerful enough to be able to do it openly without people, you know, bringing him down for it.
Who was the guy that wrote Dorian Gray?
Oscar Wilde.
Oscar Wilde, yeah, he was gay, and then got
obviously.
Yeah,
he got taken to court for it, and I think put in prison for it, wasn't he, in the end?
Yes.
I don't know much about Wilde. But I did like his argument in court, which was the idea that understanding of art comes from the audience rather than the artist. So maybe if you're seeing homosexuality in art, that says more about you than it says about me.
Oh wow, that's really cool. That's a really good argument.
It didn't. I don't think it worked for him, unfortunately. But he makes a solid point, to be fair.
Yeah, I think if he was to like accuse the homophobic audience of like being gay, it would have definitely backfired. But it's definitely clever because these people would have been struggling with their own emotions that we will never learn about, and that's what I love about history. And that's also what's so sorrowful about it, because all of these lives just they kind of get forgotten. They're just another soldier in another war. And all of those internal like storms like we were talking about earlier, you know, because they're not documented, we'll never truly we don't have a language that vast enough that we can never understand or explore these emotions.
Whenever you try to determine this thing, even you know, with the exception of like a few people who it's very, very clear, it usually does come down to a question of, well, maybe.
Yeah.
Like
sort of-
Shakespeare. There's
Yeah,
like all
Shakespeare's a
those
great example.
academics who think he was bisexual.
People have been arguing for decades over what Shakespeare's sexuality was, and realistically, we can never find an answer because the only way to find out would be to ask him, and he's dead.
Yeah.
And you know, and when people draw on the sonnets, and there's all these questions of, are they written to a real person or a fictional character? Are they written from the perspective of a character, and is it his real emotions, or is it some sort of writing exercise to imagine another person's emotions, and all of that just gets very, very messy.
Yeah.
But I think
Was
we have
there
gotten
even a
bit
real dark lady?
Well, yeah. Was that a person, or was that just something he thought up? I don't think he intended the sonnets. The sonnets weren't intended to be published, I don't think, because most of them were released after his death, I want to say. So they were more for his personal sort of interest. But we have strayed way off course, I think, so it might be an appropriate time to give our final thoughts.
Oh yeah.
Right, so yeah. Seren, do you want to go first?
I think the movie is absolutely stunning. It's so grounding and it's so human. And it's way more realistic than I think most, if not any other romantic film that I've seen. It portrays love in such a, like I said, human way. It's organic, it's free-flowing, it's natural. It doesn't try and glamify anything or make it, that's what makes a movie so beautiful. And yeah, I love it all around. I want to watch it again so that I can like learn more about it. And I think it'd be a movie good to watch with company so that you can feel all that intense sorrow and joy together. And yeah.
Definitely. What would you give it out of 10?
10! Yeah, it's got a 10.
Nice.
I would.
What about you, Michael?
I would say, in terms of 18th century period dramas about lesbians, it's equal with The Favourite, which is a movie I absolutely love and I need to rewatch. Yeah, it's... honestly, Seren said it better than I could. It's a really emotional and impactful and very well constructed film. Out of 10? Scores out of 10 are kind of arbitrary anyway, but I'd give it a solid. Yeah. Taking 5 as average, I'd honestly probably give it an 8 and... a 9, actually, a 9.
I really like this film, but I'm not really a romance genre kind of person, so that kind of hindered. I still loved the symbolism and stuff, but just the romance aspect, which was the whole film, but I did really like the whole film.
Yeah, you get what romance aspect, which was kind of the entire plot.
Yeah. I'd give it a good old 8.7.
Weirdly specific score, but hell yeah.
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 Oh, this is fun. Oh, also...
Oh, I'm doing fine. I'm great. I'm creating stuff, which is what I like to do.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Right. So, I have 2.5 pages of notes on the Dance of Reality, so I think it's safe to say I enjoyed it.
That's awesome.
I was expecting it to be weird. Jodorowsky, so... Of course it's going to be weird. But I gotta say, I was still pretty impressed by how weird it was.
Yeah.
I think on my first viewing, because I watched it twice because I had to take it in again, I think there were 5 times where I just kind of went, what the fuck? What the fuck is going on?
Yeah, so it was like, what?
Yeah,
I mean,
so...
It's autobiographical, of course, isn't it? And you can...
Yeah.
You can sort of see the bits which seem to have been based, literally episodes from his own childhood. But
yes.
It's
brutal.
Hell, it's just so strange.
Fucking weird. So,
Yeah.
Seren, what did you think about it?
Yeah, my mum was actually Chilean, so it was quite interesting because I was trying to relate it to the history and the culture that I'd heard about from her upbringing. But yeah, I was watching it and I was trying to analyse it and trying to be okay, Seren, get on top of this, understand all the metaphors that are in it. And I just was what the fuck is this? It was so beautiful, but then at the same time, I was so confused sometimes. I was I think half of the time I was just kind of lost for words. It's a great movie and it's really interesting, but it's a lot to take in. I think I'll definitely have to rewatch it.
Yeah.
It
definitely deserves a rewatch.
It earns it.
I thought it was quite impressive how they actually went back to his hometown to film the whole thing, because the whole thing was filmed in the place that it's set.
Oh wow.
Which
I gotta say though, I feel like literally having the director, who is also the main character in a sense, appear on screen to tell you about the movie and explain it is, again, it's just the kind of thing that Jodorowsky would do. Mm-hmm. really feels like, I mean, it's obviously a very personal film for him, and you can tell. Like, I would be very interested to know. Like, I think it's based on his like actual memoirs. It might be worth a read just to figure out.
I've read a review of it and
reality
like,
and
an
what's
interview
fiction.
with him, so I can fill you in with what is reality and what isn't, if you'd like.
Yes, please.
Go on, I'm curious to know what's fictionalized.
So every single bit, well, most of the bits from the first scene before the dad goes away are real. He still claims that he did throw a stone into the sea and then there was a massive wave and all those fish died and everyone was happy. The bits that are different is, unlike in the film, his mother never showed any affection to him, which is very contrast to the mother we see in the film. He also had an older sister who he didn't like, so I'm guessing he just left her out because he didn't like her.
That's why she didn't get included.
Yeah, and the second bit with the father didn't happen. His father was just an arsehole all the time, and he felt like by doing such a mad adventure, that is the only feasible way to humanise his father, to give him a redemption arc, which he never got in reality. He said, I think the quote is, his father died and he didn't cry. His cat died and he cried for 3 weeks.
Yeah, it's certainly. You feel like his parents, by the end of it, are what he wishes his parents had been. Certainly the way his father is handled, as he basically, after the sort of midpoint of the movie, he basically becomes the protagonist, and they do a really, or he does do an amazing job of humanising him, because he really does just seem like a kind of an irredeemable arsehole. But seeing what he actually is, and he's in reality an emotional man who's terrified of showing vulnerability. So he idolises a tyrant because he believes that that's what strength and masculinity is, and of course it's not. And he basically goes to a sort of almost Passion of the Christ kind of character arc, which by the end leaves him understanding that what it actually means to be a good father to his son. So I've got to say, the ending where there's massive pictures of the three of them, and then they get shot and then they get set on fire.
They burn into fire. I thought that was absolutely gorgeous. I loved that.
It looks amazing, even though it makes no sense. It's still like just he's mad. That's the thing.
He's insane and it's beautiful.
He is absolutely fucking nuts, but yet it works. He creates great stuff. But I mean, Jesus, man, he is crazy.
Did you know that quite a few members of the cast were his family? For example, his son, the dad was played by his son.
I only realised. I remember thinking at one point, like, there's a scene quite towards the end where the dad was like, wow, that is a startling resemblance to Jodorowsky. And then I saw the credits, I was like, that's why he looked like him.
Yeah, and the
grandson... He was literally his relative.
Young Jodorowsky is played by his grandson, and the two other Jodorowskys there was the other communist with the long hair and glasses. He was another one of Jodorowsky's sons. And the Theolopolist, or whatever, the one that gives the boy the medals, he was also...
Interesting, that. I think his eldest son is a frequent collaborator. Like, he's been in a few of his movies.
Yeah, he was in El Topo when they were only very young. It was something he did. One of the first films he did. It was a wild western retelling of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Jodorowsky and his son spend most of the time naked.
And El Topo is a weird movie, I believe.
Not as weird as the Holy Mountain. Shall we talk about the opening scene in the circus?
There's so many. Oh god, there's so much going on. Yeah, the clowns and the rope climbing and
the carrot and the green one.
Does one of those guys show up later? Am I mistaken?
No, they don't. But I was quite surprised by that, because they show up quite a bit in the promotional material. Yet they're only in it for like one scene.
Pretty nasty scene for kid Jodorowsky.
Yeah.
I mean, then again, a lot of this movie is just the poor boy getting the shit kicked out of him, basically emotionally and occasionally physically. But
it really shows early on in that scene that his father is a complete and utter arsehole, because when he's outside complaining about how the clowns scare him or something, and the dad's like, oh, shut the fuck up and grow some balls.
Yeah, he's
hair,
an abusive, neglectful father who tries to basically sort of get his son to be strong through repressing emotion and never show weakness or fear or pain or anything.
Definitely.
Terrible, terrible way to raise a child.
Yeah, and of course he did it so strongly that we ended up with Alejandro Jodorowsky.
I mean, again, it's not exactly surprised that a guy like that would have had a really nasty upbringing. Also, can we just address the fact that his mother was opera singing for the whole movie?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, even during sex.
I mean, again, there's just so many things, like peeing on a guy to cure him of some form of leprosy. I think it's certainly something.
I wasn't expecting that. With the bit with the sex, that reminds me that the reason why Jodorowsky's mother didn't like him was actually because he was the son of... Because Jodorowsky's father raped his mother, and then Jodorowsky was born out of that. That's why
the child
his
born
mother
of
was
rape
always
is,
cold towards him.
A nasty way to come into the world, and it's gonna lead to pretty screwed up parenting as well.
And his mother as well was a child of rape because her mother got raped by a Cossack in Russia, leading to her.
Yes, of course, because Jewish, aren't they?
So yeah, rather unfortunate.
It's also, again, pretty horrible, all things considered.
Yes, absolutely terrible. It really shows like the time period that you could get away with that kind of thing.
Yeah. Nobody bats an eye.
And then the people who got raped were still being oppressed.
It's nobody. Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it is showing how not all of the families suffer from the behaviour. You know, even the father, as abusive as he is still on a deeper emotional level suffering because of it. Again, it's only when he goes through a sort of a surreal redemption arc involving the military dictator and his horse and all that, and that he grows to be a better person. I mean, one of the things I really love is how absolutely unpredictable it is.
Yeah.
I did not see half of it. I didn't see any of it coming, honestly. Every time something happened, I was like, oh wow, what?
Yeah,
well.
It does.
What are you gonna say?
Sorry.
No, go on.
Pardon? Oh wait, okay. I think as well, for the father, there was a kind of a Joseph Campbell kind of death and rebirth scene with him, where the guy who was looking after the horse took his clothes, went into the grave, and then he with mud kind of drew a mustache on him. And I think that is in a way like his clothing that he used to wear was kind of like, I saw it as kind of like a military uniform. It looked.
I think it's literally a replica of Stalin's day-to-day outfit, which obviously he's a big Stalin fan, and it's obviously it is like a military uniform.
Yeah, well, yeah, that makes total sense with this character, and like I think with the death scene, it's kind of like, although he hasn't physically died, it's like a metaphor for like that part of him dying, like with Joseph Campbell kind of story arc type thing.
He undergoes the symbolic rebirth of the costume change, which I think is part of the whole thing of. I think he undergoes that twice, really, doesn't he? With first he kind of has two mentor figures where he has the experience of the elderly horse groomer who dies as Stalin, and then he has the carpenter who dies in the church, and again he goes through another sort of change there with the paralysed hands that he eventually regains the use of.
I'm just glad they didn't fix it through pissing on his hands.
You think Mum would have tried that?
Yeah. One thing that I picked up on was that I think it's a sort of message because he went on a mission fueled by anger and hatred, and all it really did was lead to the deaths of innocents. So, and it's showing that no matter how angry you are when you're doing something terrible, innocent people will also die. And I think that's quite a good metaphor for war. Yeah. Because even though he only wanted to kill the dictator, innocent people who had who were just living there
people
got
ended
killed
up
anyway.
dead, and the guy he set out to kill didn't end up dead. It's violent revenge is pointless and unsatisfying and never actually brings anything other than suffering. I did like the way as well that Ibanez is humanized when we finally meet him, because he spends most of the first half of the movie as a sort of omnipresent background figure being displayed everywhere in propaganda, and then when you finally meet him, he is still a violent military dictator who is clearly absolutely pathologically feared by everybody, but he also still has feelings and he still has things that he cares about, even if in this case it's a horse,
which when he's galloping on it sounds like he's weirdly orgasming.
I wondered, and
that's what I thought as well.
I remember watching that bit and I was like, that's weird. He kind of sounds like he's getting off a bit here. Is it just me being dirty-minded?
Yeah.
No, this is a Jodorowsky movie. It's almost certainly deliberate.
Yeah. It was kind of like going through my head, like in Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Rings, every time Frodo is hurt or in pain, it looks like he's about to orgasm with his face and the noises he makes. And I'm like, am I interpreting this movie like Lord of the Rings?
I'm never going to be able to do that seriously again now.
That's just Elijah Woods.
Yeah, weird sexuality and stuff like that is a pretty recurring theme in his movies. Certainly would have showed up in his version of Dune, which is quite an interesting case.
Well, it's got to be out there in some parallel universe, so...
I mean, it's always a strange thing, that, as well, because on the one hand, I am glad it didn't get made, because it would have been a bad adaptation of the book it was based on. But on the other hand,
yes.
I really wish we could have seen that on cinema screens. I mean, it was still influential in the sense that it saw a lot of very important and talented figures of late 70s and early 80s sci-fi being gathered together and collaborating and gaining... Because, like, you had H.R. Giger and Chris Foss and Dan O'Bannon and Moebius and, you know, all these people who would later go on to be very important in making films like Alien and Blade Runner and Star Wars. So even though the movie never happened, it did have a big influence. But yeah, that's a subject for another day. Though if you are interested, the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune gives the full story of it, and it's definitely worth a watch.
Yeah, I saw that a few months ago, and it was inspiring, really.
He had some weird ideas for that movie.
Yeah. And of course, the person who plays the father in this was going to be playing Paul.
Yeah, he was only like 14 as well at the time. He was going to play Paul, and Jodorowsky himself would be Duke Leto. He wanted Orson Welles as Baron Harkonnen, didn't he?
To play the Baron. Yeah.
And he was going to get. Wasn't he promised to pay Salvador Dali $100,000 a minute to play the Emperor?
To play the Emperor.
Which is just...
And also like a giraffe or something.
Yeah, there was going to be something involving... And I think he wanted Mick Jagger was going to be Fade Rother.
No, it was Pink Floyd.
Pink Floyd were going to do the soundtrack.
Pink Floyd with the soundtrack.
Oh, they're going to do part of the soundtrack at least. But I think he wanted Mick Jagger to play Fade Rother. It was...
Fade Rother. I mean, it's anything's better than Sting.
Yeah, it's completely nuts. Yeah, I suppose that is kind of unfortunate because the idea of it making a Dune adaptation sort of circulated around Hollywood for the next few years, and eventually got handed to David Lynch of all people, and we got that movie. But still,
let's hope that the new adaptation will be good.
I mean, come on, it's Denis Villeneuve. Basically, everything he touches is pure gold. So,
well, if it isn't good, I'll have my hand at it in another 50 years. Hopefully,
I think I'll trust him more than you. Then we've strayed way off course here, haven't we?
I was kind of weirded out by the scene where the father is sniffing all the underwear in the shop and he's licking the foot with the tights on it.
Yeah. It's because I think because it's as well with that scene, because that kind of leads on to the sex scene with his mum. Like you were saying that she was raped to have Jodorowsky. It was interesting because the dialogue between them was he was like let's have sex, and she was like I don't want to, and he was like we will, and then she did. So maybe that's kind of like him hinting to the fact that she was raped.
Yeah, it's rather questionable consent there. You know.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Very.
I think one of the bits of this film that intrigued me the most was that it's all displayed exaggerated, because that's kind of how Jodorowsky would see it. Like, the father is obviously trying to keep it secret that he's a communist. Yeah, in the scenes, he's got massive hammer and sickle over the shop with a massive painting of Stalin. But I think that's sort of like how Jodorowsky would have seen small Soviet things around the house, and then his mind would have exaggerated it. And as well with the people, because all the people had blank masks on their face.
Yeah.
And that kind of shows how Jodorowsky saw it wasn't really able to like see people and people that weren't right next to him weren't important because he was a child. I didn't really pick up on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I love the
as well with the like big uniforms and stuff. Like, I don't know what the actual fireman's uniform was back then. I mean, it might have been that.
Probably would have been fairly similar to that.
Yeah.
I mean, God, the whole bit with him being forced to look at the burnt corpses, you can see how that would be traumatic. Jesus.
He has
nightmares about it later.
I was genuinely rather frightened about when he saw himself in the thing.
Really screw a child up.
And he faints and then is asleep for 2 days. And the father's first thing he does is be a dick to him and burns his cool uniform.
Yeah, it's really just. But I gotta admit, possibly the most impactful part was that ending where as a child, he steps through all the like black and white images of all of the people and the characters that he's encountered before he leaves, and you see the adult Jodorowsky sort of narrating it as he's looking back at this. It is an exercise in nostalgia in a way, and it's very much a depiction of events as a child would have understood them, if you know what I mean. It's not realistic, but to the point of view of a 9-10-year-old, it makes sense. And it's such a personal movie for him. I think there is a sequel actually, which
there is a sequel. It's called Endless Poetry.
That's about his young adulthood, I think, when he was in.
Yeah, when he's a teenager. It was made like 4 or 5 years later.
Yeah, because he moved to. It was I can't remember the name of the city now. Santiago, was it? He moved to.
Santiago, yeah.
So that should probably be worth watching at some point. How old is he now? He must be like past 80.
Born in 1921, apparently. I just searched it then, so
he's got to be around. He looks relatively youthful for his age. Like,
yeah.
I mean, he's full of
Oh,
energy.
1929. Sorry, and 91 years old. Jesus, wow.
Wow, that is.
Doesn't look a day over
really
70.
Impressive. He's doing.
That is definitely.
He is definitely doing well for a 91-year-old.
One thing that kind of struck me was, I was able to see this more on the second viewing, the only time when he gets involved in the story is when he gives his father the gun. And it's quite interesting to see that when he gives him that gun, that's the point at which it separates what happened from what doesn't happen. That is Jodorowsky changing his past.
Yeah,
because
he's literally altering the narrative by interfering. I didn't notice that. That's really good.
Yeah, because if his dad had a gun, he would have done that, but he didn't. But Jodorowsky literally goes into the film to alter his own childhood. I think that's beautiful.
Again, it makes me feel bad for him.
Yeah. It really shows the regret he carries in his heart about what could have been in his childhood.
Wishing that he had better parents, really. I mean, he didn't exactly do a great job raising the poor guy.
Yes. I quite liked the scene with the, I don't know what to call him, the theosopatist. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I can't remember.
The guy with the chakras on him.
It's a Greek
His uncle.
word, theocratist, I think it is. I can't remember it exactly.
Yeah.
It believes that all religions bound in magic. I think I had a little look into it, but I can't remember what I found that much. But I found the bit where he brings the 3 metals out of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and says melt them down into one thing because they all follow the same God, and the same God lives them.
Which of course there is truth to.
Yeah, because they're all Abrahamic religions. They're all based from Judaism and just branch out with different messiahs.
Yeah, but and of course then his militant atheist father is having none of it.
Yes, and it shows the amount that Jodorowsky puts on religion, because Jodorowsky, I mean, he loves religion.
Yeah, he's very big into
breakfast,
religion, spirituality, that kind of stuff, which possibly comes from having his father being a violent atheist. Well, not his father being like a militant atheist, again, might have influenced that in the sense that he explored it later in life. But it comes up a lot in his movies, doesn't it? Religious.
Yeah, like, you know what? In the scene with the wood person, the person who sands the wood cutter person, I called from like the carpenter. I called from the get-go that was going to be like some sort of good Samaritan thing. As soon as he came to the priest and the priest put a tarantula on his hand, I was like, right, Jodorowsky's doing the good Samaritan here.
But I mean, I think I said earlier, the father's journey through suffering to redemption and spiritual resurrection is like, that's definitely a Christ analogy. He goes through like passion and torture but eventually comes out the other side.
Even ends up looking like him.
Yeah, towards the end, he's got the look down as well. Then there might also be an element of sort of Buddhist philosophy as well, with the idea that self-improvement comes through suffering and development on the pain, on experiences. Certainly, I've got to say, I'm still kind of amazed that he's able to become a sympathetic character. I think he spends like a lot of the movie as a just deeply unlikable guy.
Beating his son.
I suppose that's like people in general, you know, when you actually get inside the head and see why they do what they do, you tend to be able to sympathise with them a bit more.
I think that it might be another metaphor how Jodorowsky's father prided himself on his physical strength, but he didn't pride himself on his emotional strength. And really, emotional strength is what you get what I'm saying. He wasn't able to hold on to his emotions because he felt he was riddled with grief and suffering, and all that physical and pressure strength that he drilled into his son and been proud of, all of that accounted for nothing in the end because it wouldn't help him. He couldn't punch people, even though that's what he's good at, because his hands were, deformed.
Yeah, it's probably he prides himself purely on his physical strength and neglects his emotional state. But in the end, his physical strength fails him completely. He has to depend on emotional strength to survive and grow. Yeah, that might be. I mean, there's probably a few different interpretations of what the paralyzed hands mean. He's passive and he's made powerless through his experience. He has to regain his power and moving his hands through growth and abandoning his old persona. You could go on about it all week.
Or his physical, his impotence, he can't do anything with his hands. That could translate to how he felt that he couldn't do anything, and that's why he pushed and abused Jodorowsky as a way of expelling his emotions, because he was emotionally impotent.
Yeah. So,
Because
go on.
the scene where he kind of reforms with the Good Samaritan style guy, and he's just doing the action with his hand of sanding. The carpenter actually says to him, he's like, "Don't sand with your hands, sand with your soul." So there is this whole emotional and spiritual thing connected to it, even through the text, which is interesting. And I think as well, this is kind of off topic, but earlier in the movie, the bit where with the sea and the fish, or the So the woman introduces herself as the Queen of Cup, which is a tarot card, and she's holding a cup like you see in the card. And that whole thing, apparently, I don't know much about tarot, but I really like the idea of it. And from what it says online, it's apparently fish represent this kind of the mind and the spirit, and the whole card is about. So the Queen of Cups is a beautiful, introspective woman who sits on a throne at the edge of the sea. In her hand, she holds a golden cup adorned with handles shaped like angels. Unlike most of the cup in the suit of cup cards, the cup is closed, showing the Queen's thoughts and feelings came from her subconscious mind and depths of her soul. So that's based on the Rider-Waite tarot deck, apparently. That's the definition. But I think that's interesting because when you search Jodorowsky online, one of the first few images are him holding a tarot deck. So I'm guessing he's interested in it. I think it would. So I suppose maybe...
It's not a stretch to assume that he knows the symbolism and included it deliberately. I mean, we've said he's way into spirituality and religion. So it's probably intentional. That's a good catch. So I hadn't thought about that part with the Queen of Cups.
Yeah, and as well, kind of with the Phoropopis guy, I can't say it. Guy, he has all the chakras on him, and it's almost as if they're all open, which means that in a way he's enlightened. His ability to see all religions as kind of what they are.
He's imparting enlightenment onto the young Jodorowsky as well, isn't he?
And teaching him from a young age to be open-minded. To treat all, while he's melting them all into one, it's treating all religions the same.
And of course the syncretism of him being, painted or tattooed with all of the chakras, which are obviously from Eastern spirituality, whilst also carrying the medallions of Abrahamic religions. He's using them together in a sort of strange, unique way that obviously seems to have attained some sort of enlightenment.
The only thing that kind of reminds me of, and of course Jodorowsky, he's known for his Dune, but in that they have Zen Sunni Catholicism, which is the mixture of Zen Catholicism and Sunni Islam.
Yeah, one of the recurring things in Dune's universe, because it's set thousands of years in the future, is religious fusions. The Zen Sunni are the main one. I think the Zen Sufi show up as well, and the orange Catholic
and Judaism on its own.
Oh yeah, Judaism survived,
turns up,
which is pretty impressive in of itself. And I think they mention, I don't think they mention any other religion, but yeah, the religious fusion. Frank Herbert himself also a very philosophical guy. So, I was gonna say that might be one of the reasons Jodorowsky chose to adapt Dune, but then I remembered that he hadn't actually read the book when he decided he was going to make a movie of it. He heard it was good and was like, yeah, I'll adapt that. Which again, it's him. It's what he does. I really need to watch his other movies, honestly, with how good this one was.
Yeah, well, I might choose some more for future ones. I was quite impressed by both the animal cast and the soundtrack, because I know the soundtrack was composed by the son who played the other communist with the long hair, Adam Jodorowsky, and I don't know, in some areas it was straight up haunting, and it's not the genre that he does, because I've had listened to some of his other music, but he's a really good artist, and I feel it's really reassuring that the rest of the Jodorowskis have gone into the arts, so maybe even after, I mean, Jodorowsky's 91, let's hope he lasts for a while, but even after he's gone, the rest of his family will carry on making art, and they're all very invested in it. So Jodorowsky will, in a sense, never properly die.
He's good. Yeah, he's hopefully he did a better job of raising his kids than his parents did for him. But yeah, I think pretty much all of his children are involved in the arts or music or film or whatever or something like that. Because he himself is like very multidisciplinary. It's not just movies he's made; it's a whole lot. So,
yeah, if you look on his Wikipedia, there's like 12 different things, like 15 different professions that he's done, all wildly different. Yeah, he is a jack of all trades.
Proper Donald Glover type.
Yeah, I was quite impressed by the animal cast. How the horse, I thought, I mean, very well done to the people on set who groomed the horse for him, and the dog as well.
Well trained, good actor, the horse.
The birds, for the most part, looked good. They didn't look birdemic for the most part, which is.
I think the film had again. This one also had. I'll double check the budget. I'm sure it was a small one again. So it was only $3 million. So
only $3 million.
Like,
wow.
Two low budget for movies, but yeah, this one especially looked really good for such a small amount of money.
And they were able to get such beautiful, vibrant, colourful, gorgeous visuals like the clowns, all through makeup and lighting. And they harnessed the natural lighting and sunny areas of Chile to make it look so visually appealing. And they from the get-go they set the tone with the big mountains, kind of like the mountains around the town when he was growing up, kind of like caging him in emotionally. And it also shows
intimidating landscape, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and
with
that feel of that balance between like the reality and the fantasy kind of, with all the colour and the vibrance from the city, but with that kind of spooky and very realistic, well, the real mountain behind it, kind of the juxtaposition again.
I think magical realism is the genre. Realistic view of the world, but with magical elements, which I think, like I said, perfectly fits this sense of events as seen by a child.
Yes.
Definitely.
And early on it shows all the lepers, and they're all dying and being just walked over and having seizures, and it shows that the world they live in doesn't care for those who aren't as fortunate as everyone else.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a recurring theme with it. Like, for instance, the theme, or the scenes even with the amputees, and they're being brushed onto a truck and being disposed of like they're rubbish when they're human beings.
And I don't think, I might be wrong, but I don't think the amputees are seen again in the film at all after the military clears them off, so we can only guess what happened to the poor guys.
And the thing is, I listened to what Jodorowsky said, and apparently the amputees were blown up by some sort of American mining operation, and at the time, just like a lot of other South American countries, the dictatorship was actually being funded by America. And the only reason why the revolution eventually came and he got kicked out was because the Wall Street crashed, so they weren't able to fund it anymore. So it really shows the American colonialism in the area.
They mentioned the Depression a few times throughout the film, so it gives you a rough idea of the time period. I think early 30s it would be. Yeah, I mean, I don't know Chilean history whatsoever, so I can't comment on this one.
I know that the dictator came back in the 50s and ruled for 4-ish years, because they just voted him back in after the Second World War ended.
South America gets pretty strange sometimes, all the dictators of different brandings bouncing all over the place.
Yeah, it's like I only know kind of the history around the 60s and 70s, because that was like when my nan and my mum, when my mum was born there. But it was like, it's literally like military coups, dictatorships, and what really confused me in it was some of the costume choices. The bit where he came out of that kind of, where he was being beaten up by these military people, and he was taken out by these people who looked like they were in very 70s protest outfits, and it confused me because it kind of messed up the timeline in my head. I was like,
I thought that as well. There was that sense of like, yeah, the revolutionaries look like hippie protesters from the late 60s, early 70s, don't they? And the government agents who take him away look like
they look like CIA.
Yeah, they look like modern Men in Black CIA types with the suits. I think it might have been, again, a deliberate sort of, messing with the realism kind of thing. Maybe they ran out of budget, who knows?
I noticed as well with the ships, when they're at the docks, all the ships, they're modern ships. And whether that's because they couldn't afford to just tell all the ships to bugger off or what.
Probably that, let's be realistic.
It's still led another feeling of kind of... It's a story that could really happen at any time of a dictator and an abusive family. Even though it takes place in the 30s, this could realistically happen in any country, in any time, with any family.
Yeah, it's...
Not the more extreme elements, but the base social elements. What do you guys think about the shoe bit?
Oh, which is the shoe bit?
The bit where his friend dies, which actually happened.
Really sad.
Oh yeah. And then the he thinks he meets him, but it's actually his identical twin brother who's never been mentioned before.
Yeah. Yeah. That. I mean, I don't know if that happened or not. If it is, then that's very sad. But otherwise, very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Because kind of like, I'm not sure what did his friend actually die by him giving him shoes and him falling on the rocks, or? Yeah,
that's actually how his friend died, which really just makes the story of Alejandro Jodorowsky more tragic.
The guilt from that is gonna... Ooh.
I mean, that might have been one of the reasons in the end that he turned to religion, and indeed later on his father keeps saying, when you're dead you die and rot. Of course, that's going to be... His friends just died because of him, so that's going to be playing on his mind. And seeing a corpse, seeing what happens after you die, that's really going to hurt. Like, I did this to my friend. My friend is a corpse like this, and it's all my fault. That must have really screwed with him.
Yeah, and of course, the father denies anything beyond death, but then goes through his own symbolic death and rebirth. Yeah, he turns out to be wrong on a lot of things, funnily enough.
Yeah. I think the scene in the church actually was really interesting because you kind of had... The church itself was quite decrepit, and yet the walls had kind of like square purple blocks, which I thought was interesting because purple historically is a colour of wealth. So it's like, it was interesting balance. I was wondering, because at least from like my family's... My nan has a story where she went to the church in, I don't know where, in Chile, and she said... Beautiful. All inside it was gold, and yet outside all the children were begging. And I don't know whether... And she said it made her really sad because everyone was giving their money to the church and everyone was like walking past the kids. And I don't know whether that balance between the kind of the money from that kind of symbolism through the colour of purple mixed with the decrepitness of everything around it kind of was hinting at that, or were they completely random?
I noticed as well that the church didn't even have a roof, and with the whole him giving the church free chairs, he truly is a man of charity. He is the holiest person there. I mean, he says, the father goes on and keeps on saying, blessed be Don Jose, but he is the people going to the church, most likely they have nothing, and just being able to not having to stand through a church service, it's putting his valuable time into just making everyone's life a bit easier when they have nothing. And with the roof, that again, the chairs may not last long because of rain and they're going to be out in the rain, but I mean, who knows, he might have done this beforehand. And yeah, it really shows that even if you have very little, you can still give to people who need help. That's really nice symbolism.
It's all over the place.
And like as well, kind of a scene that was interesting with the symbolism was the Nazi scene where he's trying to salute but his hands are like, you can't move them, and then it's like, why?
That whole scene for me was honestly the peak of out of left field, because I thought I'd finally got a handle on all the weirdness, and then the fucking Third Reich show up and it's like, what?
Did you guys notice the sound effects as well? Like when he tore his shirt open, there was a bear sound effect, and when he was punching the Nazis, there was like a sci-fi laser sound effect when he punched them.
The whole scene was great. Weirdly satisfying.
All the deaths in here, even most of the deaths there of people that you've only met like 3 minutes ago, but all of them are impactful, including the woman who took him into his life when he had nothing, and then because all of a sudden he couldn't remember her life, she felt her life was meaningless because no one else could love her.
Yeah, and I think as well, what makes it kind of, the whole thing is just like, wait, what was I gonna say? I completely lost the trail of thought. I'm sorry.
Wow.
I thought it was absolutely adorable, the interactions between the dad and the horse. And you even felt bad when the horse died. And
yeah,
you had to bring down the horse.
I didn't expect him doing that at all. I thought it was going to be like, wow, I've reformed and just going to live on this like ranch with this horse now. And when he took the box off to poison the horse, I was kind of taken aback because I really thought that his character would have changed and left behind everything he knew before that.
Yeah, and he manages to sort of do what he wanted to. He wanted to hurt the dictator, and he does. He kills the one thing that he holds dearest of all, and you sort of feel sorry for this dictator when his horse has died, because you feel like a chunk of his soul has been torn out in front of him by Jami, the father, whatever his name is. And when he's just sitting on the ground and he gives the horse painkillers, which he miraculously has in his pocket, and then the bullet that and I also think that it's kind of symbolic that the bullet that was going to be used to kill a dictator is used to bring peace to the horse. So he's realised that what he's done is he's created death, and he lets the dictator kill the horse and put it out of his misery so more death isn't created. Although, suffering, I mean. And that isn't necessarily works, unfortunately.
So, the humanising the murderous dictator is a pretty impressive feat. Has to be said.
Yeah, but the horse's acting, I don't know where they got that horse, but that was a damn good horse.
Yeah, because it literally was like the horse was in pain, and a part of me was like, is this horse actually suffering? Because I kind of hope it's okay.
Yeah,
you would certainly hope. Don't want actual like yeah.
But it's just a really good actor.
Yeah.
As well as all those dogs, I was quite impressed because, like, not only did they have to make costumes for all the people, but how many dogs were in that dog show? Like 20, 30 dogs? All of them had individual costumes. And I think it was absolutely terrible that the dog that won the costume contest just had a bit of wings on, but the one that came last dressed as a fucking kangaroo. And the kangaroo dog costume was really... I really liked the kangaroo dog costume.
It wasn't a very good kangaroo costume. It wasn't kangaroo dog's fault, but you know.
I still think it's a better costume than fairy dog.
They had a podium specifically for the best and the worst, and that was it. That was quite funny.
Yeah.
Again, the sort of weird surreality of the whole thing, but and of course I think they shoot apart. They accidentally destroying the Jesus statue there again probably has some meaning to it,
which we don't know. I mean, it's there somewhere. We'll have to write an essay on it at some point.
Literally, because I think like most of the movies you could guess and it would be like grounded in some reality. If you had to guess anything for this movie and be like, I get this symbolism from it, it would just be completely wrong. Like no matter what it is.
Yeah, I think it'd be quite interesting if this movie in like 100 years' time ends up being in the English literature exams of Spain, but of course Spanish literature, if that makes sense. Because
that'd be really cool.
The amount of stuff that you can do with comprehension, the Spanish teachers would be jizzing themselves over it. I mean, if a red door can mean you hate everyone, then God knows what you can extrapolate from this.
Definitely.
I also
like
thought...
the scene... Oh, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. No, I insist. Okay, I'll go ahead. I thought it was quite interesting with the lepers, where he tries to do a good thing and tries to feed the lepers, but that only ends up badly for him. But the only reason why he tries to do the good thing is because he values his image over his family. Like, he could infect his family with leprosy and that's deadly, but he still goes ahead and feeds them, but not out of the goodness of his heart. It's to rebuild his image. He cares more about his image than his family. And that's the whole reason that he goes towards the people, the lepers, and gives them food and water. He puts his own donkey at risk and his own family at risk of infection, not out of caring for the poor, but out of caring what everyone else thinks about him.
Yeah, he's it's altruism for selfish means. He's helping people because it'll look good, not because he actually cares. Of course, by the end, I think he would help them.
Yeah,
because...
and in the end, with Don Jose, he's giving him all the money he has because he just doesn't want this guy to die in a communal grave. Well, he's already dead to be buried in a communal grave.
Not fun.
That really shows the character development. Of course, he didn't have it in real life, unfortunately, but certainly the way the way it's acted, the character feels completely different by the end. Did you guys pick up on the whole gazebo thing?
I might have.
Because I've noticed that the first time we see the gazebo, there's the fireman talking about
in the garden,
how his father's a Jew, and then they're talking about they're basically just being racist to him. And then the last time we see him, it's on fire with the dictators. So it kind of like the gazebo is kind of representative of oppression and all that stuff. And when he's burning it down, he's casting all the oppression and racism aside. And like the mother earlier on, she's talking about how the father doesn't hide because he doesn't believe in this kind of stuff. And it's showing he's finally accepting what his wife is doing and doing for the family. Anyway, you were saying something earlier. Well, do you want to go ahead?
Oh, this is only quick, and then I have a question. Just that at the end, the boat was almost kind of reminded me of the, can't remember the boat's name, but you know in Greek mythology, the boat that you get on to go to the underworld?
Over the River Styx.
Yeah.
With Charon the ferryman. That's
because like the guy was a skeleton and he used a thingy-majigger to you get it. And the question was the mum, what was the connection with the blonde hair? Like what was throughout the movie, like cutting of the hair, taking the hair off when she cut her own hair, when his hair was taken, his blonde wig was taken, like what is all this symbolism to do with that?
Well, I think
he thinks the blonde hair for Boy Jodorowsky is because she believes he's a reincarnation of her grandfather, which I think is a sort of exaggeration of him reminding her of her grandfather. And obviously he loses the hair because his father has it cut and she freaks out. I think possibly her cutting her own hair is a symbolic to her change of character. She becomes more affectionate towards her son and moves on from the idea that he's a reincarnation of her own father and instead sees him as the person he is rather than a reflection of another person.
Yes.
I think that's a really
At least
good
that's
take.
my take.
I took the cutting of the blonde hair for the blonde hair symbolises his emotion and his individualism and how his father was trying to clip his wings, sort of, and trying to get rid of his hair, which is his individualism. Either that, or he might actually have had hair like that. And when it disintegrates, that's kind of like how he would have seen it, like because to him it no longer exists anymore. So that's kind of how you would see it as a child.
He's taken away his individuality to force him into conformity.
Yeah.
In that case, I think, because
Yes.
he does it for safety, doesn't he? Because of the anti-Semitism they suffer.
Whoa.
Which is, again, also pretty good.
Yes. I don't know if I'd said this before, but I'm quite happy that they got actual disabled actors to play disabled people.
Oh, is that what they did to the amputees?
Because quite a lot,
Understood.
because quite a lot in films you'll just have non-disabled actors playing disabled people, like they'll just green screen over their legs or something. But I think it was a nice touch.
It's a nice touch, that. I hadn't really put much thought to it.
So, final thoughts and ratings.
Who wants to go first on the final thoughts?
I'll go first. This is quite possibly, possibly my favourite film I've at least seen this year, but maybe ever seen. It's the style that I love. I think that this really clicks with me. It's, if not the best film I've seen this year, and I can't give it, just from the pure artistic beauty of it, I can't give it anything other than a 10.
That's awesome.
What would you say, Sarah?
Ooh, it's hard. I think talking about it has made me appreciate it a lot more. And I think I definitely have to rewatch it to really, really understand it. I think the unfortunate thing was kind of that a couple of maybe cultural references kind of got like lost in translation, and as well I would have loved to be able to have read all the signs and all the posters in the background. But so I think, I don't know, I think it's definitely going to have to be a high score, probably 8.5, and that's purely because I'd have to watch it again to just appreciate it. Yeah, but also
Nice.
sorry.
The symbolism and the magical realism and the sense of deep personal meaning definitely really gives it this unique atmosphere. I really think you struggle to find anything like it. But I did find it dragged in places. It felt like they could have trimmed the fat and brought it up to a bit better speed. But I would probably give it a strong 8, I would say. I mean, it's still a great movie and certainly motivates me to watch more Jodorowsky. Considering what that was like, I need to see more. I mean, it's nuts,
it compels you.
but it's certainly probably a good. I don't know if it's a good primer for his work, but it certainly tells you a lot about him personally.
Yeah.
Almost certainly.
But anyway, I think we're free to finish up now, aren't we?
Right, so goodbye from me.
Yeah, it was lovely talking to you guys.
Oh, thank you. That was great having you.
talking to you
It
too.
was really, really insightful.
Thank you. And yeah, it was so much fun. Like, yeah, really good time.
That's a pleasure.
Thank you.
I think
Pleasure talking to you all.
We'll be getting more guests on in future, so
Yeah,
keep an eye out.
I've got the
Listeners?
next few weeks planned
Yeah, they'll
out.
listen
But
about that.
if anyone wants to come on, then just contact me on my social media, and I'll fit you in somewhere.
His social media.
My social media,
What an age we live in, isn't it wonderful?
the interwebs.
Information superhighway.
Yeah. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the JMC Cast, the Joseph and Michael cast, and we hope you will join us on our next adventure. So, goodbye.
Goodbye and good night.
Bye.
Or morning or whatever.